Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Have you ever received something in the mail from someone you don't know? Have you ever received threatening phone calls or hang-up calls? Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? There have been several times in my life where I was contacted anonymously. There is someone who tries to hack my social media accounts from time to time and who leaves me messages. I have a pretty good idea of who this person is. I've spent the last couple of years looking into it, but let me tell you, if you've never experienced these types of things, consider yourself fortunate. Now, I would never let someone run my life or scare me out of living it, but it's not fun to feel like you're being watched. Plus, my life just isn't that interesting. This story was requested by my viewer, Angela King Hignoyaz. I hope I'm saying that right. And it was a really timely request, because I'm sure many of you have recently seen The Watcher on Netflix. That series is based on a true story, although the Netflix series goes far and above what actually happened in real life. We now have modern tools to help us find people who are trying to stalk and harass us, but those tools don't always get us answers, even today. Now imagine it's 1982. You don't even have caller ID. There is absolutely no way to know who calls your number, but someone is calling over and over, threatening you, threatening your life, saying terrible things to you, and you're terrified. This is the story of the stalking and murder of Cindy James. Let's get into it. June 12, 1944. Cindy James was born Cynthia Elizabeth Hack in British Columbia. Her father, a man named Otto, was a retired Canadian Air Force colonel. Her mother, Tilly, stayed at home with her 6 children. Cindy graduated from high school and enrolled in a nursing school program. While in college, she met a man named Roy Makepeace. Roy was a doctor, and he was almost 20 years older than Cindy. While many people disapproved of their relationship because of the age difference, Roy and Cindy were happy, and they were in love. Cindy graduated from nursing school in 1966, and she and Roy were married 5 months later. Cindy got a job as a nurse at a treatment center for children with behavioral and emotional issues. Like I said, her marriage to Roy started out happy. They were good. But about 15 years after they wed, the relationship had deteriorated. Cindy wanted to divorce, even though Roy did not, but they separated in 1982, and then Cindy's life quickly began to spiral out of control. About 3 months after Cindy and Roy separated, Cindy began receiving strange phone calls. The first of these calls came into Cindy's home on October 7, 1982. Cindy answered the phone and heard a voice whisper softly and menacingly, "Cindy." This being the first call, she said, "Yes," and again the caller whispered her name. She said, "Who is this? What do you want?" Again, the only reply was her name. Cindy hung up the phone, assuming some neighborhood kids were prank calling people in the area, and she went on with her day. The next day, the phone rang again. Cindy answered it, and again she heard Cindy in a whisper. This time, she was more forceful. She said, "I don't know who this is, but stop calling here," and she hung up the phone. 2 days later, Cindy was home in the evening. She had pretty much forgotten about the phone calls. It was autumn, and the days were getting shorter, the nights were getting longer. The sun had just gone down, and Cindy hadn't yet closed her blinds for the evening. The lights were on in the living room, and the phone rang. Cindy walked to the phone on the end table in the living room and answered it. She heard it again, "Cindy." This time, Cindy was angry, and she was frightened. She told the caller, "Stop calling here or I'm going to call the police," and then she hung up the phone again. Feeling a little vulnerable and nervous, she reached up and grabbed the cord on the blinds and closed them. The phone rang immediately again. The caller had called right back, and this time he said, "It doesn't matter if you close your blinds. There's no use in hiding. I know you're in the living room." Yeah. Now Cindy was terrified. Not only was this person calling her and harassing her, they were watching her. She realized this wasn't neighborhood kids playing a prank. Kids don't do such dark things, not in groups anyway. This was someone who was actually watching her every move. She began to realize that she might not be safe. She might actually be in real danger. I think that would just make me mad. It's such an invasion of your space, of your privacy, right? Someone taking your sense of safety away from you, that would just infuriate me. Now, Cindy, in this day and age, this is where you go buy a gun, some cameras, and, well, believe me, there are other things you can do. I won't go into everything I do, but, I watch a lot of horror movies and true crime, and I'm ready. Unfortunately, the phone calls, as scary as they were just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, not only did the phone calls continue, but the stalker escalated their behavior. One night, as Cindy stood in her kitchen, she heard glass breaking. She ran into the front room to see her living room window shattered and a large rock sitting on the carpet in her front room. Cindy called the police. When they arrived, she told them about the phone calls she had been getting, and now someone had thrown a rock through her living room window. This very first encounter with the police is where things started to go badly for Cindy. She didn't like the reaction she got from the police officers. She could tell they were skeptical. She didn't feel like they believed her, and she was shocked that they weren't taking her harassment seriously. The police officers took a report and left, leaving Cindy feeling upset, scared, and somewhat angry about the lack of concern. She hoped that whoever was watching her house might have seen the police car there, and she hoped that would be the end of it. She couldn't have been more wrong. A few days after the rock was thrown through Cindy's window, someone smashed out Cindy's front porch light. She came home one afternoon to find the bulb smashed out of the fixture with broken glass on the ground. She wasn't sure if this was related to the harassment and stalking, so she changed the bulb and carried on with her day. Soon, she knew it had to be the same person. Not long after this, Cindy went out to her car to run an errand. Her tires had been slashed. Again, she called the police. She thought surely, this time, some type of action would be taken. Tires are expensive, and that's a major property loss. The police arrived and took a report, but again, Cindy was not just disappointed, but upset to see the reaction from the police. I have to say, though, that I think sometimes we forget the police see really awful things. They see death and tragedy. So sometimes something that feels like a really big deal to us isn't a really big deal to them. We were robbed in Austin. Someone broke into our little storage unit that was like a closet across the hall from our apartment in a high-rise. And when the police came, I was actually surprised at how concerned they were, because I know a robbery just isn't that big of a deal for them. But I have friends that have, maybe their kids get in a fight at school or their house gets vandalized, something like that. And they're always a little upset to find out that, they're not the number one police priority. I also have a girlfriend that had something happen to her once, and when the police left, she said, I didn't feel like they were on my side. Well, that's not really their job. It's not really their job to be on your side. It's their job to find out what happened. So while I can imagine that Cindy was terrified, and I think she had every right to be, I can also understand why she felt the police weren't taking it seriously enough. To her, this was her whole life being affected. But unfortunately, our laws are just not written to offer much protection for someone in her position. Not until something really serious happens can officers do much. And frankly, we can't blame them for that. We need to blame our legislators. We need stronger laws to help stand behind the victims of stalking and the police who want to do something for them. Months went by. The phone calls continued to come to the house from time to time, but they weren't quite as frequent. Cindy never really felt at ease, though, because they had never found out who had been calling, and because the calls never totally stopped. Then things got much, much worse. Cindy came home to find that her house had been broken into. Things had been moved around, but most disturbingly, the prowler had taken a knife out of one of the kitchen drawers and slashed Cindy's pillow open. It was a message, she believed. The stalker wanted her to imagine how close they had been, and they wanted her to imagine her face on that pillow, wanted her to imagine what the knife would have done to it. This person wanted Cindy to be terrified, wanted her to be miserable, and it was working. January 1983. Cindy's friend, a woman named Agnes Woodcock, paid a visit to Cindy's house. She knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. She waited a minute or so, and then she knocked again. Cindy's car was in the drive, so this friend knew that Cindy was home, and she assumed Cindy was just taking a bath, as she often did. Agnes walked around the back side of the house to go in the back door that was often unlocked and wait for Cindy to come out of the bathroom. As Agnes turned the corner of the house and walked into the backyard, she was shocked to see Cindy outside, crouched down in the backyard with a black nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. Agnes ran to her friend and removed the stocking. Cindy told her that she had gone outside to get a box from the garage when someone grabbed her from behind and put the stocking around her neck. Cindy then felt something sharp poking her in the back. As Cindy fought back, her attacker ran away. All she saw were a pair of white sneakers. The police were called and they came quickly to the house. They searched the property, but the attacker was long gone. They took another report and added it to Cindy's file. Again, Cindy was frustrated, but this time there was someone who was listening to her. A Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer named Pat McBride was very concerned about Cindy, and after being called to her house several times, they became friends. Before long, he and Cindy began a romantic relationship. Officer McBride then moved into Cindy's house to protect her and to be with her. He witnessed more and more threatening letters coming to the house. He picked up the phone calls. He heard the voice. One night, Pat was walking around the perimeter of the property in the dark, on the off chance that he might see someone watching the house. As he walked into an alleyway behind Cindy's home, there was Roy Makepeace, Cindy's ex-husband, holding 2 guns. Pat was startled, but he knew Roy, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And Roy said, "I'm patrolling the area. I'm trying to make sure Cindy is safe." Okay, now obviously none of us were there. We didn't see the reaction. But I don't know, how do you feel about that? Roy could very well have been doing exactly as he said he was doing. Or maybe he wasn't. But here's an important element. Cindy was brought into the police station to take a polygraph test after all of these incidents. Now, you know how I feel about polygraph tests. They're not accurate, they're not based on strong science, and I don't think anyone should ever take one. Well, Cindy failed her polygraph tests, take that for whatever you want, especially the parts where she was asked if she knew her attacker. So she offered to take a second polygraph test, and the police claimed that she failed that one too. Cindy eventually admitted that she might know who the attacker was, but that she refused to name him because he told her that if she did, he would go after her family. Now, even if you don't put much stock in the polygraph, and I don't, it seems very, very odd to me that Cindy wouldn't want to name the person who was making her life a living hell. That just doesn't sit very well with me. But what do you guys think? So after this attack, the notes kept coming. Sometimes they were in the mailbox, sometimes they were on the windshield of Cindy's car. But they were always menacing and threatening, and all of them were made from newspaper clippings and magazine clippings, so there was never any way to perhaps get a handwriting sample. The relationship between Cindy and Pat, the officer, cooled, and Pat moved out after being in her house only a month. He'd hoped that his presence in the home would dissuade the stalker from continuing, but once again, those hopes quickly disappeared, and things got much, much worse. October 1983. The phone calls began coming more regularly. Cindy had stopped calling the police every time she got a phone call, but she would file reports from time to time. One October morning, Cindy walked out of her house and saw something strange in the tree in the front yard. As she got closer, she was horrified to realize that there were 3 dead cats hanging by ropes from the tree. One of the cats had a sign tied to it that said, "You're next." This was the event that really pushed Cindy over the edge. Not only did Cindy call the police, but she decided it was time to get someone fully on her side. She hired this man, a private investigator named Ozzie Caban, to help her. Ozzie took Cindy's case, and as part of his investigation, he gave Cindy a 2-way radio so that they could be in constant communication. Remember, no cell phones back then. So for about a month, not much happened. And Ozzie was starting to wonder if the stalker had seen him walking around the house at night and had then backed off. But then, on January 30th, 1984, Ozzie's 2-way radio started going off. He pressed the button to talk to Cindy, but she did not reply. Instead, he heard scuffling and what sounded like a struggle. So Ozzie rushed to Cindy's house to find her, unconscious, on her kitchen floor with a black nylon stocking tied around her neck. One of Cindy's hands was free, but the other was stabbed, the knife still in her hand, pinning it to the floor. On top of the pinned hand was a note that said, Now you must die. See you next Tuesday. Ozzy, the private investigator, called the police, and Cindy was taken to the hospital for treatment. Cindy later told Ozzy that she'd noticed a man coming through her gate. Before she could get to her radio to call Ozzy, she was being hit on the side of the head with a piece of wood or something similar. She remembers being held down on the floor, and she said she felt a needle go into her arm. Ozzy thought because she had been drugged, she wasn't able to wake up when her hand was stabbed to the floor. This is where things really take a turn. Police do a thorough investigation. There is no sign of forced entry at the house. The doctors did find a needle mark on Cindy's arm, but toxicology reports came back clean. There was no substance in Cindy's system to knock her out. Still, the police continued to try and get to the bottom of what was going on. They brought Cindy's ex-husband Roy in for questioning and told him that Cindy informed them Roy had been violent with her on several occasions. Roy said that yes, there had been some instances of violence, but that he had nothing to do with what was happening to Cindy. About 6 months later, in June of 1984, Cindy was attacked a third time. For the third time, she was found unconscious with a black nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck, and she had needle marks on her arm again. The police decided it was time to tap Cindy's phone lines. Not only did they tap her phones, but they assigned officers to watch her house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in shifts. After months passed with no further attacks, the police stopped watching the house. They couldn't afford in the budget to continue spending that much money on one person. Just 2 years after these events began, police had spent $1 million on Cindy James complaints and attacks and still had absolutely no idea what was happening. I can completely understand why they had to back off. That is a lot of money to spend on something that seems to be happening because of a phantom. After everything that had happened at this point, there should have been some evidence. On December 11th, 1985, Cindy says she was attacked in her home and rendered unconscious. She called the police from a payphone, telling them that she had just woken up in a ditch about 6 miles from her house. Again, she had needle marks on her arm. Again, she had a black nylon stocking around her neck. At this point, Cindy's friend Agnes and her husband moved in with Cindy in hopes that they could either catch the stalker or they could stop him. Maybe their presence would get him to stop. One night in April of 1986, now 4 years into the stalking, Cindy ran into Agnes and her husband's bedroom saying she had heard a strange noise. Tom, Agnes' husband, said he'd actually heard it too. He ran downstairs to the first floor and he could smell smoke. He then ran to the basement to find it in flames. Tom was able to put the fire out and the police were called. When they interviewed Tom, he told officers that he had seen a man standing on the street outside Cindy's house, and as he approached him to find out who he was, the man ran away. Even with Tom's testimony, police still believed Cindy had set the fire herself, because you see, at this point, they thought she was behind it all. Apparently, this is because they could not find any unknown prints in the house, and there was a very dusty windowsill on the outside of the basement for the fire incident that hadn't even been disturbed. That's why they didn't believe anyone had climbed in through the window to set the fire. Not long after this incident, Cindy James was admitted to a psychiatric facility. I couldn't find information on whether or not she entered on her own or if others ended up admitting her, but she ended up spending 10 weeks there. While she was there, of course, she was examined by psychiatrists. 2 of them determined that Cindy had been staging her own attacks and that she was suffering with psychosis. One of the doctors was troubled when they found Cindy had written in her journal, quote, "I still feel suicide is my best option in an unbearable situation, and as soon as I can get out of here, I will carry out my plan." When Cindy was released from the psychiatric facility, she was fired from her job. And this is when Cindy decided it was time for a whole new beginning. She legally changed her last name from Makepeace, her married name, back to James. She moved into a different house, and I even read reports that she had her car painted to change its appearance. Cindy went into aftercare for about a year, and she was seeing a therapist. She seemed to be doing a bit better for that time period, but sadly, it was too good to be true. October 1988. Cindy James was found at home by friends in her car parked in the driveway. She was naked from the waist down. She had been hogtied, and of course, there was a black nylon stocking tied around her neck. Now, I would really like to see if there are any photos of this, because hogtied, if you're really hogtied, that's pretty much impossible to do by yourself. But maybe she wasn't actually hogtied, you know? When the police were called, Cindy told officers that she had come to the conclusion that her ex-husband Roy was the stalker and had been all along. The problem with that theory? Roy Makepeace was out of the country on a couple of the days that Cindy was attacked. Roy also continuously denied any involvement in the stalking and actually expressed concern for Cindy. By this point in time, 6 years after the first phone call was received, Cindy James had made over 100 emergency police calls, had filed hundreds of incident reports, and had reported 5 violent physical attacks on her person, and still there was no sign of the stalker. Most police officers and even some of Cindy's friends no longer believed the stalker existed. Then on May 25th, 1989, Cindy disappeared. On the day that happened, she had gone to the bank, deposited her paycheck from her nursing job, she had gone to the salon and had her hair done, and then she bought a birthday gift for her son to give to his friend. She also went grocery shopping. Cindy's friend Agnes showed up at Cindy's house later on that evening for their regular card game, but Cindy wasn't home. Immediately, Agnes raised the alarm. Police arrived and searched Cindy's house. She was definitely not there, so they put out a bolo, be on the lookout, for her car, and soon it was located sitting in a shopping mall parking lot. There was blood on the driver's side door, and Cindy's wallet had been spilled inside the car. Some of her credit cards were on the floorboards. The groceries she had purchased and the birthday gift were still in the back of the car. Cindy was nowhere to be found. The search continued all night and into the next day. A week went by, and then 2. On June 8, 1989, a man named Don Finish, who was a city employee, stumbled upon Cindy's body in the backyard of an abandoned house. She had been dead for some time. Her face looked to have been punched over and over. There was a cord wrapped around one of her ankles and around one of her wrists. Her hands were tied behind her back. I cannot show you the photo here. The police were called and Cindy's body was removed from the yard and taken to the coroner. There it was discovered that Cindy had a lethal dose of morphine in her body. The man who found Cindy's body told the press that there was no way Cindy could have done this to herself. The police and the coroner disagreed. The morphine would have taken about 15 minutes to kill Cindy. They believe she injected herself and then tied herself up. They even brought in an expert on ropes and knots who demonstrated how it could be done and stated that the direction of the knots proved Cindy did it to herself. Ozzy, the private investigator, remained steadfast in his opinion that Cindy James was most definitely being stalked and that there was no way she would have killed herself. His opinion on that has never changed. Cindy's parents were contacted and were, of course, distraught to hear that their daughter was dead.
In your opinion, was Cindy James murdered?
No question in my mind at all.
Nobody, but no one, can come to me and give me any kind of rational explanation as to how she could have done it herself. I did have to break a door down at one point where she had been attacked and left with a nylon stocking tied around her neck and a knife through her hand. That was about the most bizarre, because when you have a knife through a person's hand with a note saying next time you're dead, and you find a person and you can't find any vital signs, that's a little chilling.
There was no way that she did these things. There's no way that she was suicidal at the time. There was no way she could have possibly done what happened in her death.
We just feel that, God, if the truth could only come out.
Police ruled Cindy James' death a suicide, but many questions remain. If Cindy was planning on ending her life, why did she go to the salon, the grocery store? Was she really that maniacal that she put in that extra effort to make it look like she had plans with someone that evening so people would be even more convinced that she'd been murdered? The most pressing question for me is this. If Cindy wasn't being stalked, then how did other people hear the phone calls? Not only Officer Pat McBride heard them while Cindy was in the room, but Agnes and her husband heard them. Her husband also saw somebody standing across the street after the fire was started. Was Cindy psychotic because she was mentally ill, or was she psychotic because she was being stalked and emotionally tortured? I am really curious to know what you guys think on this story. I'm not sure what I think. I'm really baffled by this story. I think one of her psychiatrists actually said it best when they said, this woman was under siege from whatever source, inside or out. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Hit that like button if you liked the video, it helps me, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. You can also join my Patreon. There will be some bonus content there that helps a lot. And for a couple of dollars a month, you can help us reach our end goal of raising money to donate for cold case DNA storage testing. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.